Hey guys, I'm Tiffany,
I'm Stephanie,
and we're
Sisters
Sisters
of
of
the
the
South.
South, back with another true crime video for you guys today. But before we get started, we just want to remind everyone that if you like our video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more true crime content every week, which is
Free.
and everyone loves free. And hit the little notification bell so you can spend some time with us. And before we get started with the story, we have to give a shout out to our friends over at So Fly.
So fly.
Not so small.
Not so small.
Not no more.
more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're testing out new jingles, guys. So let us know which one you like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're just making it fun. They are a Houston family owned business and they specialize in embroidery and laser work. So, what they do is they take an accessory such as a cap, hoodie, t shirt, apron, keychains, cutting boards, tumblers, and they will specialize it to your needs. So, if you want your name, logo, icon, initials, anything you want, they'll work with you to personalize it for you. Also, if you're doing embroidery, you can work on different types of colors they have available. So give them a call or reach out to them via social media or by an email and let them know what you need and what you want to make your ordinary occasion special. So we're going to show you a little video, and here we go.
All right, guys, we hope you like that video. Please go check them out, buy you some cool stuff, let them know we sent you. And if you do, please send us a picture because we want to see it.
Absolutely.
And we will be putting their information in the description box so you can go check them out. So, with all that being said, Stephanie's going to tell us a story.
Yeah, this story that we're going to share today is actually up in Canada, so not in the US, but it's so intriguing to me because we read a lot of true crime cases and do research on them, and some of them are obviously not suicide cases. Obviously, there's so many signs, but yet the detectives and the police fall flat, as far as I'm concerned, on solving the case. And so it's almost like they can't figure it out, so they just throw suicide on the death certificate. And this is one of those cases. And so I think by the end of the story, you're all going to be left scratching your head. But I've come up with what my theory is. I'm sure Tiffany will come up with what her theory is, and we'd like to know what your theory is. So, with that being said, let's get started on this crazy case. So on June 8th, 1989, Gordon Starchuk, a municipal worker of British Columbia, Canada, discovered a body. The scene was shocking. In the backyard of an abandoned house in Richmond, a woman in her mid-40s had been hogtied with rope, with a black nylon stocking wrapped around tightly on her neck. In the crook of her in the crook of her elbow, a small prick in the skin seemed to hint at a recent needle injection. The fuel tank of the house was emblazoned with cold, brutal graffiti that seemed to announce the discovery. Some bitch died here. The body belonged to Cindy James, a 40-year-old Canadian nurse who had been missing for nearly 2 weeks. For 7 years before her death, James had been tormented by a stalker who had physically assaulted her, invaded her home, and left threatening messages warning her of the murderous intent towards her. She had reported more than 90 cases of harassment from her stalker to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Force, who had spent more than $1 million trying to capture the perpetrator.
Wow.
That's a lot.
Jeez.
The discovery of her body seemed to point to an obvious conclusion. After evading authorities for the better part of a decade, her stalker had finally escalated to the point of killing his victim. But her death was instead assumed by the RCMP to be either an accident or suicide, because for the past several years, authorities had begun to suspect James was faking her own stalking, and that her death was actually at her own hand, whether intentional or accidental. Cindy was born Cynthia Elizabeth Hack in Oliver, British Columbia on June 12th, 1944. One of six children, James spent her teenage years studying in Ottawa and went on to pursue a nursing career in Vancouver when she turned 18 in 1962. In her private diary, she made reference to her father's physical punishment and strictness and the oppressive atmosphere she felt in her home growing up, which is sad. She feels that, but yet she still has a calling to be a nurse.
Right.
And even though she's struggling with her home life, she still is moving forward to better her life. And I think that's
Amazing.
amazing, right? So 3 years later, James met Roy Makepeace, a psychiatrist originally from South Africa, and the two married shortly afterwards in 1966. Her family had doubts about their relationship due to the 18-year age gap between the two. Makepeace was 40 at the time of their marriage, while Cindy was just 22, and the marriage was marked by emotional distance and intermittent physical abuse from Makepeace to James. During this time, James worked at a variety of institutions, starting as a pediatric nurse in Vancouver General Hospital and eventually taking on a position as team leader at a facility that provided care for children with behavioral issues. Her marriage lasted till the summer of 1982 when the couple separated after a strained and unhappy union. James would later claim Makepeace had thrown a candy dish at her head during an argument, and that he frequently spoke of murdering people with crossbows, which Makepeace denied, though he did admit to slapping James several times over the course of their marriage. So it just sounds like this guy is verbally abusive and physically abusive.
Hmm.
And if someone's telling you they want to kill someone with a crossbow, I mean, first of all,
Odd.
that's odd. Um, but that's going to cause some pause, you know,
A little
in your
bit, yeah.
marriage. Like, what kind of person am I married to? And he's a doctor. He's supposed to, carries the oath that he's supposed to save people's lives. And he's over here saying, oh, I just want to take him out with a crossbow. I mean, that would be very concerning. So within 4 months of their separation, James had reported the first instance of harassment. Initially, the harassment took the form of frequent phone calls from the unknown stalker beginning on October 7th, 1982. James didn't go into great detail about the content of these calls, except to say that they were often violent or in nature. Sometimes the caller would simply sit in silence at the other end of the line, the only thing audible being their breathing. And that is
Creepy.
creepy as heck, because they're there and they hear you. So there's an intent there to instill fear in you.
Oh, yeah, and it works.
And if she had been married to this guy, for, a while, I'm wondering if it didn't dawn on her if she knew the breathing.
Right.
Did it sound familiar to her? I don't know. But that's a question we'll never be able to ask her. Barely a week later, things had escalated. James reported that someone had thrown a rock through the window of her back door and entered her house, though nothing seemed to have been stolen or disturbed. Pat McBride was the investigating constable for these initial instances of harassment, and James and McBride soon began a romantic relationship. Like James, McBride had recently separated from his spouse, and he moved into James's apartment soon after they began seeing one another. And I think probably McBride was probably intrigued by her. She was an attractive lady, but he probably felt like he wanted to protect her too.
Right.
Just coming out of you know, a, a recent divorce, and it probably made him feel important. He was a sense of comfort for her, and he wanted to save her, and protect her. So it's kind of, I think it's pretty obvious why they probably began a relationship.
Oh, yeah, she felt safe.
Yeah. McBride suspected James's ex-husband Makepeace to be the perpetrator, though he denied any involvement in the harassment. Of course he's going to deny it.
Who admits to
What's he
that?
going to say? Yep, it's me. I mean, he's not going to admit it, and there's no proof at this point. It's just speculation. Not long after McBride moved in, he discovered Makepeace parked in the alley behind James's home. When confronted, Makepeace claimed he was trying to catch the perpetrator in the act and left quickly.
Oh my
It's
gosh.
not his job
Okay.
anymore. Okay. First of all, if he's not the perpetrator, it is no longer your job as the ex-husband to be watching after her,
He
if
shouldn't even be
she
around.
especially if she has a new love interest that's moved in with her.
Mhm.
So, what's your deal, dude? It makes him look
Yeah,
guilty.
absolutely.
Yeah, so later McBride and Makepeace would spend evenings together at James's house trying to discover the identity of the perpetrator. And I would instantly think that was odd. If I was Cindy, I would think that was odd, and if I was McBride, I would think that's odd. Like, why are you over here helping? I think he was just trying to figure out what they knew or what they thought.
Yeah, I think
That
so
was what
too.
he was doing. In my opinion, I think that's what Makepeace was doing. In these initial months, the preponderance of evidence was on James' side when it came to the veracity of her claims. McBride, while he was living with James, claimed to have picked up on one of the no talk calls himself while Cindy was in the room with him. A trace was applied to James's phone shortly afterwards, and though the calls did not last long enough for a full trace, they were identified as coming through the Richmond telephone exchange. Downstairs neighbors claimed to have heard strange noises coming from James's apartment after she had left for work one day. And another neighbor claimed to have witnessed a strange man who she identified as not being Makepeace standing outside the house on several occasions. Just before Christmas that year, James found a note outside her house with an undeniably threatening message. Merry Christmas, along with a photo of a woman's corpse laying under a medical sheet.
Wow.
He's a doctor. Her
Yep.
ex-husband is a doctor. You know, who's going to have access to that sort of photos? A doctor would. And this is not like this isn't the days that you can just Google a picture and download it to your phone, right? So it sounds suspicious, on it casts a light on Makepeace to me at this point.
Yeah.
The first physical attack came less than a month later on the 27th of January, 1983. Agnes Woodcock, a colleague of James, came by James's house to find her unconscious in her freezing backyard with a stocking wrapped around her neck. When she came to, James told Woodcock she had been attacked by a man with a knife when she had been approaching her garage. The man, she claimed, had taken her to the garage where another man had been waiting. Threatening to kill her sister if she reported the attack, the men then strangled James and assaulted her with a knife. It was this assault that first began to sow the seeds of doubt in the minds of those investigating her case. Doctors were unable to find injuries concurrent with the sexual assault she claimed to have suffered. David Boyer Smith, the lead detective of James's case, later testified that he believed James was not telling the whole truth, in fear of herself and her family. Shortly afterwards, James moved to a new residence in West Vancouver and then to another in April of 1983 when she continued to receive threatening notes at her new address. And you got to think, again, back then, you're not as traceable as you can be now. And so this has to be someone who's aware of every move she makes.
Yep. Well,
And
yeah, because you could make yourself unlisted back
yes,
then,
you could unlist yourself. You had to pay a fee, but you could make yourself unlisted.
and then it was harder to find you.
Right. And so this has to be someone who is pretty aware of her movements, and if Makepeace is coming in there and talking to her and her new love interest and what have you, he's going to know that she's planning on making a move.
Besides the fact that he's following her
Of
everywhere,
course, he's following
he
and
knows
watching
where to
her.
find her.
Right. And at this point, they don't even have children together. So he needs to just
Move on.
get out of her
God.
life. but he's so interested in her safety, yet he didn't care about her safety when they were married because he was beating up on her.
Yeah.
So none of that makes any sense to me.
Well, and I have a hard time with these cops saying, well, I mean, there's no evidence. So why would someone make that up, though?
That that's another thing.
It's not like
That's
she
a
needs the attention.
no, that's a lot of time and energy,
Ugh, yeah.
wasted time and energy. I mean,
To tie yourself up and let your friend find you outside in the freezing cold.
yeah, it's just nuts to me. But, I'm sure there's things that the cops picked up on body language or something, but honestly, she is being terrorized at this point. So she's not going to be acting like a normal person. And she may not remember
No.
everything that happened
She's
because she
traumatized.
exactly she's traumatized and she's scared. And she's probably not coming with the full truth because she probably is scared something could happen to her family. If they know her sister and who her sister is at this point, she's probably questioning everybody if she doesn't know who the perpetrator is.
Right?
So James went to great lengths to try and throw her harasser off the scent and hired the services of a private investigator, Ozzie Caban, to help keep her safe. She repainted her car, consistently carried pepper spray, and even began wearing a portable panic button. And let's
Wow.
be honest, why are you going to spend all this money to do this, to go to this extreme, if you're the one doing it to yourself?
Right.
I mean,
For
why?
more
For
attention?
more well, yeah, but then you're
To
also
try to
digging a
show
hole
people that you're
financially.
that terrified? I just feel like this is too much.
Right. I mean, why are you going to dig a hole financially to just get attention, to do that to
And it's a
yourself?
lot of time, guys. I mean, I don't know where someone would find the time to even come up with this.
Yeah. Um,
I'm sure there are people out there. I just don't see it.
well, we know there have been people who faked their kidnapping and
Ugh,
things like this,
yes.
but we're talking years
Yeah.
of moving, and
Repainting your car,
I'm sure it wreaked havoc on our finances and
everything.
just everyday life, you know. These developments did little to deter her alleged harasser, though, as the calls continued to James' home and workplace, and by the end of the year, James discovered 3 strangled cats dumped in her yard, bound with rope. Nearly a year after the first attack, Ozzie Caban received an urgent call from James in the evening of January 30th, 1984. Arriving at her home, he found the doors locked and had to kick one in to access her residence. Inside, he found her unconscious on the floor with a paring knife stabbed through her hand, pinning a note reading, "Now you must die, cunt," to her body. And I mean, again, the cops are thinking she's doing this to herself.
You can kind of fake being unconscious. You'd have to really be a good actress to.
Well, and she's kind of locked in her house at this point. He's having to kick in doors to get to her.
Yeah.
So the cops are probably like, okay, I mean, really? You could have at least been smart enough to unlock one of the doors or maybe prop it open. But you also got to think a home has windows. So maybe they slid through a window or something.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Did the cops do their due diligence and check that out? But, there's other ways of someone breaking and entering versus going through a door. I mean, typically they find other ways. This violent scene was explained by James as a result of an attack from a man who had entered through her front gate and then incapacitated her with a blow to the head. She also reported having a needle inserted into her arm by her attacker. While a needle mark was discovered, no drugs could be identified in James's body. And again, we go back to her ex-husband
Is
is
a
a doctor,
doctor.
right? And so she's being found with needle marks in her arms and things like that. Now, I'm not a doctor. I don't know a whole lot, but there are certain drugs that can be entered into the body that are not
Untraceable.
traceable. So, who would know that? A doctor. Who has immediate access to needles? A doctor. So, he's on my radar hot and heavy at this point. So, over the following few months, the attacks on James, her property, and her pet dog Heidi increased dramatically. Over the summer of 1984, James reported a number of terrifying incidences to Caban. A man infiltrated the house and assaulting her dog, notes with explicit photos left in her basement, men posing as police officers turning up on her doorstep, more dead cats dumped in her stairwell, and continued calls to her home and workplace. In July, James claimed to have been attacked while walking her dog one evening by a man in a green van and was discovered around midnight that evening walking dazed around her neighborhood with a stocking tied around her neck. Heidi still wandering the park James said she'd been attacked in. During this time, James herself suspected Makepeace of being behind the harassment, as did several officers working on the case. He was questioned repeatedly over the course of 1984, and James herself wrote in a private diary that she believed he had deliberately ruined her garden by dumping the dead cats there. Her investment in gardening had at one point been a point of contention in their marriage, as Makepeace felt it drew attention away from him.
Oh, geez.
So he's one of those.
A garden?
Well, I mean,
Good God. Okay.
instead of growing vegetables, she should have been growing their marriage. I don't know. This guy is an idiot.
So you're going to tell me that he really isn't behind these things? She's got her a new man. She's not paying any attention to him anymore. He
Yes.
got mad about a garden.
A garden. Yeah. I mean, sure, why not? Makes sense to me.
See, my husband's like, yeah, go on. Tend to
Oh,
your
you found some
garden.
new entertainment. Good deal.
Have fun. I'll see you later.
I mean, and she's privy. And that's why I say, like, the breathing on the phone and things like that. She had, she's feeling that it's make peace at this point. There's probably little things that's convinced her in her mind that it's him. And even if she told the cops that, they're going to be like, yeah, whatever. I mean, at this point, she probably feels like they think she's doing it to herself anyway. I'm sure they're making it very
I feel so
obvious.
bad for her, too,
Yeah.
because she's so scared.
Yeah. So while James was in the hospital after the July attack, a mysterious man called the front desk to ask about the hospital's security policies. And she's in the hospital, so how is she doing this herself? But anyway, later the receptionist confirmed they believed the voice could belong to Makepeace after hearing a recording of James's ex-husband. In October of 1984, James made a shocking confession while under the care of a hypnotherapist. She claimed that she had witnessed a double murder years earlier, the memory seemingly repressed until her hypnosis sessions. Over the next few months, she would reveal more details about this alleged crime, that her ex-husband Roy Makepeace had murdered a couple and dismembered them with an axe while the couple were on holiday off the coast of British Columbia.
Okay.
I would start doing some research to see if there was a missing couple in British Columbia, right? If I was
Yeah,
a police officer.
absolutely.
Yeah. So authorities launched an investigation into this double murder and swiftly found holes littered all over James's story. Her sister, who had been on the trip with her, had noticed nothing unusual during the time of the alleged murder. The cabin where James had located the killings was never discovered, despite extensive exploration by boat around the area, and had no missing persons cases where they were reported in the area that matched with James's account. During this investigation, James attempted suicide and was involuntarily committed to a psychiatric ward. And I'm going to be honest, at this point, we're talking years that she's been stalked. She probably thinks she's crazy. She's
Oh,
probably
yeah.
questioning her own sanity at this
And
point.
to me, I feel like that would be like a vacation
Right. She just
to
needs
get
some sleep
away.
and rest at
Yes.
this point. She's exhausted. Again, she's probably questioning her own sanity, because I'm sure the cops are just reeking of doubt when they speak to her.
Hmm.
And she's having to deal with that. Like, they think I'm crazy. Maybe I am crazy,
Yep.
So by the time James returned home, the harassment had once again begun in earnest. She received packages containing rotting meat and nylon stockings similar to those found wrapped around James's neck in the various attacks she had reported. Several fires were started in the basement of James's property, and the detective Gary Foster later testified that he believed they were started by James herself, referring to undisturbed dust and spot on a windowsill that the perpetrator would have had to climb through to access the basement. And that makes sense. I mean, at least he did his due diligence there. But who's to say that someone didn't have a key to her house that was doing this?
You mean the locked house? Yeah, they've got to get in and out somehow.
Yeah. And so who's to say that when he was coming up, when Makepeace was coming over to Cindy's house, he didn't slip in, grab her key, run to the store, get a copy made, and bring the key back? I mean, there's so many ways of doing that. Or leave while he's in there, even if the windows are locked, leave a window unlocked. And she's, maybe didn't check it and he slips in. And I mean, there's various ways that he could have done this.
Okay, so he's a doctor. He's apparently not seeing very many patients because he's
Well, no, he's busy
very busy.
dealing with Cindy at this
They
point. I mean, if
couldn't
he's the
check
guilty
on
one.
that. They're asking him questions. They need to go a little further. I'd be
Well,
like totally on this guy investigating him.
why don't they go to his house?
His house,
I know
his
you have to have
office.
a
He's got an
warrant.
office. They can figure this stuff out. They can look at his schedule.
Yeah, I mean, they would have to have a warrant to go in his home, but obviously he's got, stockings stashed at his house. And if the stockings he has at his house matches the ones that she's getting sent, voila, there's proof right there.
You could go as far just to start off, call and try to make an appointment and see if he's ever there.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry,
What's his
sir.
schedule?
He's not in the office that day. He's
Yeah.
never here. Come on. I used to
Yes.
be that person. They can call and do that.
He's super busy at this point. Yeah, he's not doing a lot in his practice at this point.
No, he's literally just there all the time.
Yes. So during this period, James complained of another no-talk call. Investigators were able to trace the call with BC Telephone, discovering she had, in this instance, at least dialed her own number. Anthony Marcus, a psychologist, was assigned to interview Cindy James about her harassment, and he shared his belief that she had invented the campaign of violence and intimidation carried out against her. He positioned the idea that she might have dissociative identity disorder, a disorder characterized by periods of amnesia, and could be unaware that she was the one physically carrying out her own harassment. He stated that this woman was under siege from whatever source, inside or out. That sounds like multiple personality disorder to me.
Yes.
Okay, if again, I'm not a doctor, but if you're doing stuff while you're awake that you don't know what you're doing, it's possible she had he's saying it's possible that he's saying dissociative disorder, but it sounds like maybe a multiple personality disorder. I don't know, but they're not believing her story at this point, and I still don't understand why anyone could go to this length or would go to this length in their own life to destroy it.
I want to see a reenactment of how that she could do the things that they're saying she could do to herself.
Well, she's not in Houston, Texas. She's in Canada. If you're in Houston, Texas, though, they can show people in court how you hog tie yourself and lock yourself in a closet, and then you can get out. But, we're in Canada in the 80s at this point, so I'm sure that they weren't that sophisticated quite yet.
I'm not sophisticated, but I could be like, how the hell did she do that?
I mean, they're not
Let's
sophisticated.
try to figure this out.
But they're very suspicious.
See, I'm just curious.
I agree.
I really want to see if I can do this.
I agree. It's worth noting here, though, that Alan Conley, a psychiatrist who had been treating James since 1983, believed her claims of harassment, though he did believe James was also suffering from mental health issues at the time. You think? Again, if someone has been harassed for years and years and been in fear day after day, year after year,
that's a given.
That's going to give you some mental issues.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but I don't know how smart this guy really is, because that's just obvious. That's a given. So James moved once more at the end of 1985 and on December 11th suffered another apparent attack. She was discovered more than 5 kilometers from her new home, semi conscious in a ditch at the side of the road by passing motorists. Once again, her neck was bound with nylon stockings and she was covered in cuts and bruises and suffering from hypothermia due to the frigid conditions. She claimed to have no memory of what brought her to this state. Her last her last recollection going to a local pharmacy on her lunch break at work. With the new theory put forward by Anthony Marcus, James began to suspect that police did not believe her. Well, yeah. I mean, it took her a long time. I'm thinking this whole time, she's got to know. I'm sure their body language was telling
Their
her.
tone of voice.
Their tone of voice, ugh, it's her again. Oh my God, we've got another attack. It's Cindy. They're probably on first name basis at this point.
She's got her own phone line.
It's Cindy, the crazy lady. She's been attacked again. I mean, I'm sure that they all had their little verbiage going on, at the police department.
But she's putting herself in harm's like hyperthermia. Like,
Yes.
come on now.
I mean,
Just for
attention.
what? Yeah.
Yeah, for what? Other than attention. It could be nothing else.
Yeah.
Her colleague, Agnes Woodcock, who had previously discovered James after the first attack, and her husband Tom began staying with Cindy some nights to try and make her feel more comfortable. And that's a good friend.
That is a good friend.
Because, I mean, you're kind of inserting yourself in a dangerous situation at this point. So they obviously really cared about Cindy.
And believed her.
And believed
she
her.
needs those friends around her.
Yes, right. So on April 16th, they were woken to find James pacing the house, claiming to have heard a commotion. Shortly afterwards, Tom discovered a fire in the basement, and the phone line apparently cut after he tried to call the authorities. Upon fleeing the house, Tom claimed to see a man watching the chaos from the other side of the street, but when confronted, he quickly ran off. And that's not strange.
No.
Why, if someone just approaches you and asks you something, if you're not guilty, why are you running off? I mean,
He's shy.
yeah, at the very least.
Yeah.
James fell into a deep depression after this incident, refusing to eat and suffering from doubts about her own sanity. She was committed to the hospital after Connolly feared she might attempt suicide, and during an intensive psychological evaluation, he reported James' profound distress, as she described in the instances of harassment over the preceding few years, including her fears that she might be perceived as crazy. Yeah, I mean, I saw that coming a mile away.
No joke.
And
So what happened to the boyfriend in the midst of all of this?
I'm
Because he's gone now.
assuming that he
Couldn't take it
couldn't
anymore.
take it. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure if you care about somebody, I'm sure it's hard to watch him go through this. And I'm sure that Cindy's state of mind was not stable either.
Right.
And it probably wreaked havoc on that
I'm
relationship.
sure it did.
Yeah. So after 10 weeks in the hospital, she was discharged and confided in her father that she was withholding information about the stalking, specifically that she knew who the perpetrators were, but could not divulge their identities for reasons she could not explain. James returned to work in 1987, and the harassment soon began again. Her back window was broken, her porch light bulbs loosened, and someone had used a glass cutter to make a hole in her basement window, according to James. So in late 1988, her ex-husband, Makepeace, received a number of strange messages referring to Cindy, one calling her dead meat, and the other, another grand after we wasted the cunt, no more deal. Makepeace submitted the tapes to his attorney, and they have since been released to the public. Within 2 weeks, Cindy had been attacked again, bound with nylon stockings and hogtied. I mean, I wouldn't trust a MFing thing that guy gave me.
No.
Now he's inserting himself like they know who he is, and they're calling him. So it just makes no sense to me. It's just obvious who's doing this to her. An expert hired by the RCMP concluded that it would have been very difficult for James to have tied the knots herself. Several more break-in attempts would make place over the following months into early 1989, with the scent dogs coming to mixed conclusions about the presence of an intruder's scent. In one case, the dogs found a trail leading out of the house, and in another, turned up nothing unusual. James filed a complaint against the RCMP, accusing them of not taking her case seriously and dismissing her suffering.
Wow, okay,
And
good.
I agree with her on that.
Yeah,
It's almost like they didn't take her serious, so they didn't even do any investigation.
yeah,
At some point, it was just too difficult for them, so they just abandoned ship and left her on her own. All they were doing was entertaining her at this point by taking her calls because they kind of had to.
yeah.
But I don't think they were doing any follow through or follow up on anything. So on the evening of May 25th, 1989, the Woodcocks were due to play bridge and spend the night with James. When they arrived at her house, they found it empty and her car missing. Driving around to search for her, they discovered her car in the parking lot of a nearby shopping center. They reported her missing to the RCMP, who found blood in her abandoned car, along with the contents of her wallet scattered on the ground. 2 weeks later, Cindy James' body was discovered, hogtied, neck bound with nylon stockings, mirroring previous attacks by her alleged harasser. An autopsy concluded that James had died of multiple drug intoxication from morphine, flurazepam, and diazepam, which is Valium. At first, a huge amount of diazepam and flurazepam had been orally ingested, enough on their own to cause death, and then morphine had been added to the mix. Whether through injection or orally, it was difficult to conclude. And that's a lot of medication.
Yeah, it is.
So I'm sure that it was hard to conclude which came first, maybe which one took over the other, I mean, that's just a lot for any one body to ingest. An exhaustive, expensive, and extended inquest began into James's death in 1990 as authorities tried to establish whether her death had been murder, an accident, or a suicide. At 40 days, the inquest was the longest in British Columbia history at the time. Over 80 witnesses, including Roy Makepeace, of course,
Of
because he
course.
inserts himself in everything,
Yeah.
provided evidence to the jurors.
Oh, good for
Amongst the
him.
most interesting revelation was that Cindy's parents found a significant amount of sedative medication in their daughter's house after her death, which they disposed of. Her sister also found a glass cutter, a syringe, a saline solution in Cindy's possession. Not expert Robert Chisnall also demonstrated how Cindy could have bound herself with the stockings before the sedative effects of the drugs she'd consumed took effect, though this relied on the assumption that they were taking orally and not injected. And honestly, why wouldn't she just take the pills, lay down in her bed, or take the injections, whatever, and lay down in her bed and go to sleep? Why? And you also got to think about this. She obviously went to the location that they're saying she picked and then injected herself and then decided to hogtie herself.
Well, unless she was literally taking her life to frame someone else, which I think is completely insane.
Yeah, because she's not even,
Why would she do that?
she's so
Just end it. What
terrorized.
difference does it make now?
Right. Just be done with it. I, and guys, there's pictures out there, but the way she was tied up, they're saying she could have done that on her own. But it would be very difficult. And not to mention, I'm sure when all of this medication kicked in, it made her extremely ill. Okay.
Mhm.
So she's just going to lay there and suffer after she's hogtied herself. I mean, it just doesn't. Usually, if someone has made the decision to end it all, they want it pretty much quickly and done and over with. You don't want any
Why
suffering
make
because you've
yourself
already
suffer?
suffered
You're already
enough.
done.
You've already suffered enough. Let's just get it done and over with. Whatever the outcome is, I don't care. I'm just done. Right.
Yeah.
And so this just seems like an extreme. And the way she was tied up makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
How they could even conclude that. So after 7 years of harassment, contradictory evidence, hospital stays, new addresses, and several violent incidences, jurors were tasked with deciding what actually happened to Cindy. Was her harassment faked? Was her death intentional, either by her own hand or her abuser? How much did Cindy really know about what was happening to her? After over a month of evidence, the conclusion was as frustrating as the rest of the case. Unable to agree on the outcome, the cause of her death was eventually marked as an unknown event. The investigation into Cindy James' death was officially closed. And that was it.
That's heartbreaking.
And to me, it's so obvious if they would have just put time and effort into Makepeace and really do their due diligence in investigating him, I think they would have found their source.
Well, yeah, because, okay, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Whoever was doing this was spending a lot of time and money.
Mm-hmm. Syringes, medications. You're talking about, injection, uh, injection marks on her arms. All of those things are things that someone in the medical field would have access to.
Yes, easily.
Right? And he's trying to interject himself, even with a new love interest in her life, interject himself into keeping her safe and wanting to know who's doing this, but yet he had no interest in keeping her safe while they were married. The guy, I think, was very manipulative, and he was mad because she left.
Yeah.
And he had a
He
grudge
couldn't
against her.
he couldn't control her
He
anymore.
was vindictive, and he was just going to torture her. And it was a long, torturous journey
Yeah, it was.
to this for this conclusion. And so I just feel really bad for Cindy. I don't think she did it to herself. I think that the person who did this to her took time and effort to make her look crazy,
I agree.
and it worked.
It did.
And so if Paul Makepeace was the one who did it, he walked free, and he was patient during that process. But my opinion, I think it was Paul Makepeace.
I agree.
So, yeah, guys, tell us what you think. Have you heard of the story? I know it's not in the United States, but it's not far from us. And I know their judicial system runs a little different than ours over here, but yet we still have cases over here that end up the same way in a lot of instances. So I'm just curious of what you think. Who do you think did it? Do you think she did it to herself? Do you think it was Paul Makepeace? Do you think it was some other guy that she knew, or two other guys? Or do you think Paul Makepeace was paying somebody
Okay,
to
because
do
she
it for
said
him?
she knew their identity, but if it
Mhm.
was him, why wouldn't she just give it?
Well,
Why wouldn't
because
she
I
say his
think
name?
she was in fear. Because
It's happening anyway.
right, but I know, but she's not mentally sane at
Stable.
this point. She's living down in the trenches of this crap, right? So she
Well, and
can't
she
see
made it
clear.
seem like it was more than one.
Yes. And that's why I'm thinking maybe Roy
He had
Makepeace
someone
had
helping
hired
him
somebody.
while he was at work.
Yeah.
He had to see patients at
Well,
some point.
I mean, he had to have an alibi every once in a while, at least, you know.
He
I
had a
don't know.
practice to run.
I mean, yeah, he had a practice to run. He had shit to do.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
He was busy
He was a
finding
busy
ways
man.
to torture Cindy. That's my opinion. Don't come for me on that. That's my opinion, and I'm entitled to it.
But let us know yours.
Let us know yours. So, yeah, guys. All right. Until our next episode, remember to see the good and stay imperfectly perfect.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you.